Somaliland will also probably improve US-Ethiopia relations, another way to push back against the Houthis.
In an interview to the Guardian newspaper published in the UK, he says recognition is on the horizon.
Only a day earlier, Kenya's President William Ruto implying that Ruto thinks Somaliland's recognition is at least on the cards.
For recognition of Somaliland, the US will be building a military base near the port of Berbera.
Vile ni kwamba serikali ya Somaliland imefungua ofisi yake mpya ya ubalozi.
It is from Somaliland and we respect these people because they are very, very strategic.
We don't care about this little politics here and there. We are going to support Somaliland 100%.
However, tucked away in Somalia's northwest, there's actually a functioning democratic state called Somaliland, which has been de facto independent for 34 years, but is yet to be recognised by any UN member state. When Trump was elected last year, there were a flurry of reports that he was considering recognising Somaliland, and while these rumours died down once he took office, they've suddenly reignited, with Somaliland's president telling The Guardian last week that, quote, recognition is on the horizon, and Kenya, one of the most powerful countries in the region, affording tacit recognition by allowing Somaliland to open a liaison office in Nairobi. So in this video, we're going to have another look at Somaliland's long struggle for independence, and whether it could soon become the world's newest country. We've actually done a couple of videos on Somaliland before, so go and watch that if you want to know more. But the TLDR is that modern-day Somalia used to be split into two colonial territories, Italian Somaliland in the east and British Somaliland in the northwest. In 1960, British Somaliland became the independent country of Somaliland, to be recognised by 35 other UN members. 5 days later, though, Italy gave up Italian Somaliland, and the two immediately united to become the Somali Republic, which is what we now call Somalia. In retrospect, this was probably a mistake from Somaliland's perspective. Italian Somaliland had a population roughly 3 times that of British Somaliland, and the north was often overlooked by the south. Somalia's first constitution, for example, only passed in 1961 because it had overwhelming support in the south. Somaliland got its chance for autonomy in 1991, when Somali dictator Siad Barre was overthrown by anti-government rebels, including the Somali National Movement. The Somali National Movement were a northern paramilitary group, and after ousting Barre, they decided to declare Somaliland's independence, with basically the same borders as the British Protectorate of Somaliland. In 2001, they held a referendum on independence, which was supported by 97% of Somaliland citizens. Since then, Somaliland has essentially been an autonomous state, and a beacon of stability in a region otherwise beset by chaos. They've held multiple peaceful elections, and in 2017, Freedom House ranked Somaliland as the only free country in East Africa. The country is very poor, but they've got their own government, currency, the Somaliland shilling, passports, police force, license plates, and even a consulate in Washington. Despite this, Somaliland hasn't been explicitly recognised by any other country, in large part because most of the international community worries that recognising Somaliland's statehood would encourage other nearby separatist movements. Nonetheless, a handful of countries have indirect relations with Somaliland, and there were even rumours late last year that Donald Trump was considering formal recognition. This is actually an idea that comes from Project 2025, the infamous right-wing manifesto drawn up by the Heritage Foundation that's apparently popular with Trump's team, which recommends, quote, the recognition of Somaliland statehood as a hedge against the US's deteriorating position in Djibouti. For context, the US, like lots of other countries, has a military base in Djibouti, but American policymakers are concerned about China's growing influence, and Trump could build a second base in Berbera to bolster America's position. Anyway, these rumours sort of died down earlier this year, but they restarted last week when Somaliland's president Abdirahman Mohamed Abdullahi gave an interview with The Guardian, claiming that, as part of an ongoing recognition process, Trump's ambassador to Somalia had visited him 3 times in the past year, and that America's most senior military official in East Africa had recently visited Hargeisa, Somaliland's capital. Only a day earlier, Kenya's President William Ruto had met Abdullahi in Hargeisa to announce that Somaliland would be opening a liaison office in Nairobi, implying that Ruto thinks Somaliland's recognition is at least on the cards. This also comes a couple of weeks after former UK Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson, who's long been an ardent advocate of Somaliland statehood, told The Guardian that US officials had told him they were on the cusp of recognition. So why have these rumours suddenly restarted? Well, we see at least two possible reasons America might be interested in Somaliland again.
The Republic of Somaliland has a government, passports, a flag, and an army. It has territory here on the Horn of Africa. And like almost all African countries, it was once a colony of a European power. But Somaliland is not a country, not technically. To the international community, it's a naughty breakaway part of Somalia. So then, what gives? Somaliland is separate, relatively stable, and it acts like it's sovereign. So how did it get to exist, and why does it still not count as a country? The self-proclaimed Republic of Somaliland emerged in 1991 as the state of Somalia was in the process of disintegrating, something that started in the early 1980s. Led primarily by the Somali National Movement, the Republic of Somaliland claimed sovereignty over the colonial borders of the Protectorate of British Somaliland. The British Protectorate had been, very briefly, recognized as independent in 1960, until it united with Italian Somalia that year to form the Somali state, which collapsed 30 years later. According to the government in Hargeisa, today's Somaliland is the continuation of that legitimate pre-union entity. According to everyone else, you can't just walk out of a legal country, even if it barely functions. The Darey regime's brutality in maintaining its power, and particularly its war on the Isaaq clan, served as the catalyst for the former protectorate in the north declaring its own independence after rebel groups ousted him, and Somalia collapsed in 1991. However, as Somaliland agreed to join Somalia in 1960, no country accepts their retroactive claim to the imperial-era border, and key to being a country is recognition by other countries that you're really a real country, so Somaliland isn't. Further complicating its assertion to independence is a decades-long border dispute with another Somali. Perhaps the final nails in the coffin for Somaliland's international acceptance are warnings from the UN and the African Union that recognizing one separatist state could easily start a firestorm of conflicts across post-colonial Africa.
Somaliland, a self-governed state in the Horn of Africa, is grabbing headlines for its newfound geostrategic importance and its quest for independence. What's driving the spotlight on this land of 6 million people? And how does the US-China rivalry factor in? We take a deep dive into its history, geography, and geopolitics. Tensions are running high between Somaliland and Somalia as the US and China take their battle to the Horn of Africa. US President Donald Trump is said to be considering recognizing Somaliland as an independent country in return for gaining access to a military base there in order to counter China's influence and monitor regional threats such as the Houthis in Yemen. Some US lawmakers such as Scott Perry, who belong to Trump's Republican Party, are pushing for statehood to Somaliland. Perry has introduced a bill proposing formal US recognition for Somaliland. Now, before I proceed any further, let me give you a brief history of Somaliland and why it matters. Somaliland sits on the northern coast of Somalia, covering 176,000 square kilometers along the Gulf of Aden. In terms of area, it is around the same size as the state of Andhra Pradesh in India, or slightly smaller than the West Asian country of Syria. Bordered by Ethiopia, Djibouti and Somalia's Puntland region, its 850-kilometer coastline is a gateway to vital Red Sea shipping lanes. Somaliland's strategic location makes it a focal point in regional geopolitics. With a population composed mostly of ethnic Somalis, its terrain spans coastal plains and rugged mountains. A former British protectorate, Somaliland gained independence in June 1960, briefly uniting with Italian Somaliland to form the country of Somalia. By 1991, after a devastating civil war collapsed Somalia's government, Somaliland reasserted its independence. It became a de facto state with its own currency, passport and regular elections. But Somalia considers Somaliland as a breakaway region and rejects its claim for independence. Despite Somaliland's de facto statehood, Somalia's government in Mogadishu asserts full territorial control over it. Now, the Horn of Africa is a veritable geopolitical chessboard. Somaliland is located at the intersection of many converging, oftentimes competing interests, economic, military and strategic, of many countries in the region and beyond. Now, the scramble for foreign bases along the Horn of Africa's coast is of particular concern to the US, which established its first and largest military facility on the African continent in Djibouti in the year 2002. China opened a military base in Djibouti in 2017. It is China's first overseas military base. Now, the US is eyeing another base, this time in the neighboring Somaliland, the Red Sea port of Berbera. Now, Berbera has a 4,000 long kilometer runway built by the erstwhile Soviet Union during the Cold War. It has one of the longest landing strips in Africa. The airfield was once rented by the US Space Agency for space shuttles. It was recently inaugurated and renovated by the United Arab Emirates, but remains vacant. For its part, Somaliland is pitching Berbera as an attractive proposition for the US and as an alternative to a congested Djibouti, where the US base sits next to that of the Chinese and some European nations. An article published by the New York Times is headlined, "African Breakaway State Offers US a Chance to Stick It to China." It says that as the trade war with China heats up, a new US foothold on the African continent could help counter Chinese influence. Somaliland's ties with Taiwan and Berbera's potential as US base escalate this rivalry. Somaliland's President Abdirahman Mohamed Abdullahi wrote a letter to Trump in January this year in which he said, "Many countries, when forced to choose between the US and China, opt for the latter. We have consistently chosen and will continue to choose America, Taiwan and other free democratic partners." Tensions escalated when Taiwan opened its representative office in Somaliland's capital, Hargeisa, in 2020. Since then, Taiwan has spent millions of dollars on military training, agriculture, medicine and infrastructure in Somaliland. But there's a catch. Recognizing Somaliland could shift US strategy in the Horn of Africa. According to reports, some US officials close to Trump, who is now into his second term in office, are in favor of closing the US embassy in Mogadishu. So, in conclusion, after 34 years of its de facto independence, no country has formally recognized Somaliland. The Trump government's interest in statehood for Somaliland is clear, but it has not committed to it just yet. But Somaliland's President Abdullahi remains hopeful. In an interview to the Guardian newspaper published in the UK, he says recognition is on the horizon. President Abdullahi says it's a matter of time, not if, but when, and who will lead the recognition of Somaliland. Some reports suggest that Trump's nascent proposal of resettling Palestinians from Gaza to Somaliland could spur the US to recognize the territory as a separate country. As Somaliland navigates regional rivalries and seeks global recognition, its future hangs in the balance. Will the US take the historic step of recognizing Somaliland as a separate country? Will Somaliland finally become an independent nation, the 194th member of the United Nations?
Kwingineko ni kwamba serikali ya Somaliland imefungua ofisi yake mpya ya ubalozi hapa mjini Nairobi baada ya wizara ya mambo ya nje kukataa kutoa idhini. Rais mpya wa Somaliland Abdirahman Abdullahi alifungua rasmi ofisi hiyo muda mfupi baada ya kukutana na Rais William Ruto katika ikulu ya Nairobi siku ya Jumatatu, saa chache baada ya kuwasili humu nchini. Wizara ya mambo ya nje ilikuwa imeandika barua hapo awali kusema haitaruhusu kufunguliwa kwa ofisi mpya ya ubalozi huo. Hata hivyo, Rais Abdullahi akizungumzia umuhimu wa kuwepo kwa ofisi hii hapa Nairobi, haswa kwa raia wa Somaliland na Kenya wanaotafuta huduma tofauti. Zaidi ya Wakenya 12,000 wanaishi na kufanya kazi katika nchi hiyo ya Somaliland.
But I want to give you our 100% support in the Senate. And I want to say this. This is a democratic country. We don't care about this little politics here and there. We are going to support Somaliland 100%.
The Somaliland diaspora community in Kenya is very vibrant, patriotic, and devoted to support their homeland. As His Excellency officially opening this new premises, let us remember that true measure of this mission success will be seen in the opportunity it unlocks for the students who secure a visa to study, the entrepreneurs who finalizes cross-border deal, and the family reunited after years apart.
What we are doing here is more than an inauguration or opening of a mission. We are confirming and reconfirming a bond that has grown organically through decades of shared aspirations, mutual respect, and unwavering partnership. The movement is a proof of resilience of our people and the vision of our leaders. To the Kenyan officials present, your presence honors us, and your nation's steadfast pragmatism in engaging Somaliland has paved the way for this day.
We go to other news now. The Kenyan government has given the green light to Somaliland to set up a liaison office in Nairobi. Somaliland President Abdirahman Mohamed Abdullahi, who jetted into the country on Monday, officially launched the mission in Runda, Nairobi, after an official nod from the Foreign Affairs Ministry. He noted that the mission will serve as a diplomatic representation in Kenya, facilitating trade, consular services and political engagement.
After days of waiting with anticipation, the people of Somaliland now have a liaison office here in the capital. The event, which was set to commence on Tuesday this week, was cancelled by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, noting that no approval had been granted for such an event and that the activity does not carry the endorsement or the formal recognition of the Kenyan government.
We Kenyans sincerely apologize for small hitches that has happened here. It is not our culture. It was not meant to humiliate you. I assure you that the Kenyan government, the Kenyan political system welcomes Somaliland so much.
However, the mission has confirmed that the Kenyan government has given the nod for the historical ceremony. The ministry acknowledged Kenya's appreciation for its relations with Somaliland.
And to the Somalilanders, whether one-time presidents of Kenya or newly arrived, this mission is your home.
According to the Somaliland President Abdirahman Mohamed Abdullahi, the liaison office will serve as a diplomatic representation in Kenya, facilitating trade, consular services and political engagement.
What we are doing here is more than an inauguration or opening of a mission. We are confirming and reconfirming a bond that has grown organically.
It is from Somaliland, and we respect these people because they are very, very strategic. They know how to live with other communities.
One of the things that are challenging to Kenya Somaliland Council is unemployment. As much as we are reaching to the Kenyan market, we are also asking the Republic of Somaliland and the President for job opportunities.
Since Somaliland declared its independence from Somalia in 1991, it remains unrecognized internationally, meaning its diplomatic mission functions remain as a liaison role rather than a formal embassy.
Somalia doesn't have a great international reputation. It's one of the poorest and most violent countries in the world, and it's been in a state of crisis since the collapse of Siad Barre's authoritarian regime in 1991. However, tucked away in Somalia's northwest, there's actually a functioning democratic state called Somaliland, which has been de facto independent for over 30 years and held peaceful presidential elections just last month. Despite its best efforts, Somaliland has not yet been recognised as an independent state by any UN member state. But this could all be about to change. Earlier this week, it was reported that Trump was planning to make the US the first country to recognise Somaliland. So in this video, we're going to take an abridged look at the history of Somaliland, why Trump wants to recognise it, and whether it's actually a good idea. So, to understand this story, you need a bit of context about Somaliland. We've actually done a couple of videos on Somaliland before, so go watch that if you want to know more. But in 1960, British Somaliland became the independent country of Somaliland. to be recognised by 35 other UN members. 5 days later, though, Italy gave up Italian Somaliland, and the two immediately united to become the Somali Republic, which is what we now call Somalia. In retrospect, this was probably a bit of a mistake from Somaliland's perspective. Italian Somaliland has a population roughly 8 times that of British Somaliland, and the north was often overlooked by the south. Somalia's first constitution, for example, only passed in 1961 because it had overwhelming support in the south. Somaliland got its chance for autonomy in 1991, when Somali dictator Siad Barre was overthrown by anti-government rebels, including the Somali National Movement. The Somali National Movement were a northern paramilitary group, and after ousting Barre, they decided to declare Somaliland's independence, with basically the same borders as the British Protectorate of Somaliland. In 2001, they held a referendum on independence, which was supported by 97% of Somaliland citizens. Since then, Somaliland has been essentially an autonomous state outside of Somalia, and a beacon of stability in a region otherwise beset by chaos. They've held multiple peaceful elections, and in 2017, Freedom House ranked Somaliland as the only free country in East Africa. The country is very poor, but they've got their own government, currency, passports, police force, license plates, and even a consulate in Washington. Despite this, Somaliland hasn't been explicitly recognised by any other country, although it's been indirectly recognised by a handful of countries. South Africa, for instance, accepts Somaliland passports. The UAE set up a small military presence in the country in 2017, and Ethiopia signed an agreement with the Somaliland government to use Berbera Port. Interestingly, however, the question of Somaliland's prospective independence has been a relatively hot topic in both the UK and the US. In the UK, 5 local councils, namely Bristol, Sheffield, Cardiff, Liverpool and Tower Hamlets, have, for some reason, passed resolutions recognising Somaliland's right to independence, and it's a weirdly popular idea on parts of the right. Recognising Somaliland was actually one of Nigel Farage's UKIP policies back in 2015, and it's long been a pet project of Gavin Williamson, who you might remember as Theresa May's Defence Secretary. Williamson, who's perhaps best known for suggesting Russia should, quote, go away and should shut up, and that the UK should fire paintballs at Spanish ships off the coast of Gibraltar, actually got the UK to set up an office in Somaliland's capital, Hargeisa, and introduced a bill about recognising Somaliland as a country to the Commons last year, and has even been recognised as an honorary Somaliland citizen in recognition of his efforts. And it might also be down to lobbying from the UAE, which has emerged as a close US ally over the last few years, and has relatively close ties with the Somaliland government. But the main reason that Trump, as well as some other Republicans, are now keen on the idea is probably because Somaliland, which sits just south of the Red Sea along the Gulf of Aden and across from Yemen, is in a strategically important position, since Somaliland will give the US yet another way to push back against the Houthis and other groups in the region, hopefully guaranteeing safe passage for commercial traffic. Recognising Somaliland will also probably improve US-Ethiopia relations, given Ethiopia wants to sign a port deal with Somaliland, and this could also be strategically useful given Ethiopia's relatively central role in African and East African affairs. Nonetheless, even if there is a clear strategic rationale, and it's probably true that Somaliland does in some sense deserve independence, the reason that groups like the African Union generally oppose redrawing borders like this is that, while Africa's current borders clearly aren't perfect, the process of redrawing them usually creates even more instability. Now, you might argue that Somaliland is an exception. After all, it's been de facto independent for more than 30 years, and the risk of a domino effect are negligible.
The Kenya International Convention Centre came alive with vibrant colours and celebrations as the Somaliland community in Kenya held a consultative meeting with visiting President Abdirahman Mohamed Abdullahi. From traditional songs to striking cultural attire, attendees embraced the spirit of the grand festival. President Abdullahi highlighted Somaliland's rich experience across various sectors and expressed the region's readiness to contribute on both continental and global platforms. Joining President Abdullahi was Professor Pielo Lumumba, former director of Kenya's Anti-Corruption Commission, who revealed plans to establish a Pan-African Institute across the border in Hargeisa. President Abdullahi closed the event with a call to action to build, advocate, and secure the international recognition of Somaliland.
And shifting focus to Somaliland now, a breakaway territory of Somalia that declared independence in 1991, but has not been internationally recognized in 34 years. This, however, may change soon. In an interview with the UK's publication The Guardian, Somaliland's new president, Abdurrahman Mohamed Abdullahi, has said that it is likely that the territory will finally win acceptance to its right to self-determination. He added that it is just a matter of time, not if, but when, and who will lead the recognition of Somaliland? Experts say that leading it could be none other than US President Donald Trump. Reports say that recent US overtures have been encouraging for Somaliland. Any move in this direction by the United States would infuriate Somalia. Mogadishu views recognition of Somaliland as an attack on its sovereignty. It says any such action could set a precedent for secessionist movements across the African continent. But US President Donald Trump might be willing to risk it for a strategic advantage in the region. Reports say in return for recognition of Somaliland, the US will be building a military base near the port of Berbera. Now, this is a strategic location on the Gulf of Aden. The Somaliland president also said US military officials visited Hargeisa, and another US delegation is expected to evaluate Berbera for this to be a potential strategic port. The US has a key military base in neighboring Djibouti, but now concerns are growing over Chinese influence in the country as Beijing continues to strengthen its ties with African nations. The US is yet to announce any formal arrangement with Somaliland, but the President Abdullahi has said that the two have been security partners and have been fighting terrorism and ensuring trade safety in marine routes. In April of this year, the US aircraft carriers off the coast of Somaliland played a key role in America's bombing raids on Houthi targets in Yemen and responding to the Iran-backed group for disrupting Red Sea shipping lanes. On record, the US State Department asserts that it recognizes the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Somalia, but reports say the Trump administration is now split over its approach to Somalia.
What words can be used to describe Somaliland? Peaceful, stable, rich in heritage, or entrepreneurial. With an estimated population of 6.2 million, the country was excited about its 34th anniversary of reclaiming its independence from Somalia. On May 18, 2025, Somalilanders united to celebrate but also reflect on their struggles in order to achieve peace and stability.